So it's the
That
Boneyard,
must be
Alaska.
a mammoth jaw, right? Because it's got the flat grinding teeth.
Yeah. Look at those teeth, man. Isn't that incredible?
Yeah.
So it's the Boneyard, Alaska on Instagram, and he's got it very detailed. And
He's invited me up there, actually. He sent me a message after, I think, our first show. Somehow we got on the same topic, and he sent me a message.
we talked about him, and he said he got 15,000 new Instagram followers from our conversation.
Good for him. That's
and
great.
And then he's like, all right, I'm only going to talk to Joe and tell my whole story. And so we had him on. He's wealthy. Like, he doesn't have to talk to people about stuff.
He's choosing to.
Yeah, so he just does it because he wants to.
Yeah.
So he's like, he won't talk to journalists. He's getting all these phone calls from New York Times and these people. He's like, fuck off.
Well, I read a thing the day or two after you guys did your show that he started like a bone rush in the East River of New York. People going to look for bones that have been dumped in the East River.
Apparently they were.
Yeah.
According to the records, they dumped a shitload of them, and he gave out the very specific location. So now there's guys combing the bottom with radar and looking for these things.
Wow.
It's really interesting. Look at this. Treasure hunters search New York City's East River. Ha ha. Isn't that funny? This all came from my stupid little podcast.
All from your show. You created a rush.
News is reporting this like it's. Look at this.
Look, it even says spurred on by Joe Rogan podcast. Look at that. That whole extinct megafauna thing. The fact that North America, we used to have cheetahs and giant llamas and like
huge lions that are bigger than African lions.
Huge lions, like the amount of and the abundance too. It wasn't like today we have great animals in North America, but the abundance is so much lower than Southern Africa. It used to be 8 times higher.
Yeah.
Can you imagine like just walking? Imagine like you decided to walk 3 blocks and you saw like 500 giant animals. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, that used to be here.
Yeah.
Nuts. Have you ever heard of the American Prairie Reserve? They're trying to buy up massive swaths of land and reintroduce bison, a bunch of different animals to this area. And they essentially want to rewild some of the Great Plains.
I think that's great, man. I think rewilding is the key to conservation in the future. I mean, have you seen that in...
Go scroll back up, please, so I can read that, Jamie. It says, bison used to number in the millions on the Great Plains, but animals in conservation herds now stand at around 31,000 and are considered near threatened. Because most conservation herds are less than 500 on small landscapes, the species is listed as ecologically extinct. So what they want to do is bring them back.
Yep. And allow them to influence the environment and help the ecosystem.
Only an estimated 360,000 bison remain in North America today. And what's really crazy is they got down to like almost extinct.
Yeah.
Where they almost eradicated the bison from North America. And, they weren't even eating them.
No.
They were eating tongues.
Right.
And they were getting the skins from some of them later on. But a lot of it, they were doing it for the tongues.
Well, and I don't know if you know this or not, but the majority of the reason they killed them was in order to diminish the survival of the Native American people because it allowed the Native Americans to survive off of that animal, right? Because they were so reliant on them. So there were all these campaigns like, go out and kill the bison, head out west, have fun, shoot them from the train. Because if you depleted those numbers, the Native Americans were forced to move or they just didn't
forced to go into the reservations.
Exactly.
Oh,
yeah. And so it was a very ugly thing. And that part of it's sort of covered up, right? They sort of, that doesn't get spoken about a lot.
It most certainly was a tragedy, but like almost like inexcusable to the point of extinction. When you look at the size of the piles of bones that they were standing on, and like that they didn't see that this how fucked up this was.
I don't believe that they couldn't tell that they were having a massive impact.
Oh, they had to quickly.
Yeah.
They had to. I mean, if you're shooting millions of them, which is just nuts.
Yeah, so Colossal Biosciences is this, if you ask me, incredible company, and they are, by their own declaration, a de-extinction company. So it's this guy, Ben Lamb, and he's got George Church, who's a world-leading cellular scientist. I don't know the specifics, of de-extinction and cloning and CRISPR and so on and so forth. And they are de-extincting animals. And the science is there. Like, it's done. All it took was the money, basically, behind it. And they've put together this incredible Rolodex of scientists and people. And it's real-life Jurassic Park with purpose.
Where are they going to put them?
First one they're working on is the woolly mammoth, right? And this isn't just for fun. This has real, important conservation implications, which is really fascinating. Starting with, I think, 100 mammoths and putting them in this park in Siberia that they've been doing this experiment on as to what happens when you add megafauna back into the Arctic tundra to offset carbon emissions.
Wow. And so they're using what DNA? They're using elephant DNA and mixing it with something else?
Indian elephant is the closest living relative to the woolly mammoth.
And what does an Indian elephant look like? Is it similar to an elephant?
Yeah, it's a smaller, so African elephants are bigger. They have the really big ears.
Right.
Indian elephants are typically the ones you'd see at the circus, with the pink in the ears, the smaller triangular shaped ears. And they're using CRISPR technology, and they're using existing mammoth DNA, and they're making an embryo, and then they're implanting it into the Indian elephant, and 22 months later, an Indian elephant's gestation period, she will give birth to a mammoth.
A real mammoth?
A real mammoth.
So it's not like a hybrid?
If you imagine the DNA of an animal, right? And then you imagine the fragments that are broken out of it, right? What they're doing is they're taking that DNA and all those pieces that are missing from the mammoth, they're putting in Indian elephant pieces. So you end up with an animal that is physically and morphologically identical to a mammoth, but has used all of the DNA from the closest living relatives in order to get there.
Phew. This process, how long does this take?
So I think they've been going for about 5 years on the science, but the science of de-extinction and cloning, I mean, you remember Dolly the sheep, right? That was like a known thing. So that's been going on for a long time.
Well, you can get your cat cloned.
Exactly.
Or your dog cloned.
Exactly. For like 20 grand, you can clone your dog. Yeah. So the science has been there for a while. There just hasn't really been the funding or the motivation for it. But what I think so fascinating, the reason I'm so like emotionally invested in it, is the conservation implications that it has. Rewilding species that humans have removed. And that's going to, in theory, in a lot of places, sort of fix the offset, the imbalance of the ecosystem.
That's interesting. There's a lot of debate about whether or not humans killed off the woolly mammoth, though, isn't there?
I think there is, yeah. So the Arctic used to be like the savannas of Africa. It used to be big grasslands, right? It wasn't all covered in trees and things. And that's a recent adaptation since the mammoths went away 10, 20,000 years ago. And so that's what's happened is the permafrost up there is melting pretty rapidly, right? Underneath that permafrost is like 1.5 trillion tons of carbon. And once that carbon enters the atmosphere, it heats things up like crazy. So once we removed all the megafauna from the Arctic through hunting or maybe other means, regardless, the Arctic got warmer. The Siberia and Alaska got warmer. And so slowly we're getting more and more carbon emissions from up there. But by putting these animals back, and I just love the idea of going up to the Arctic and it looking like the African savanna, right, with all of these incredible animals. By putting these animals back, it in theory will make the Arctic colder, slow down the melting of the permafrost, which will in turn trap the carbon for longer in the ground.
So they're going to